Notre Dame, Georgia, New Year's Day, Sugar Bowl, 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Kickoff. A lot of you, Peepaw, I'm looking at you. You'll have to watch SportsCenter the next morning or CBS Sports HQ the next morning to get your final score. McElroy and McDonough on the call here. Going to be a good one. Going to be low scoring. The total at FanDuel right now, 44.5. So Notre Dame is in a position where they could get the biggest win under Marcus Freeman thus far. I feel that way about this game. I didn't feel that way about the Indiana game, although it may classify as that. This right here is where you really test yourself. They run the ball. They play great defense. They are excellent in turnover margin. I think they're third in the country. They're first in takeaways. Georgia is like middle of the pack in those categories. And you also know, or should know by now, that Carson Beck's gone. He's hurt. He's done for the year. He is declared for the NFL draft. And so it is Gunnar Stockton. Georgia has traded in their Lamborghini for an old F-150. I'm not making that up. That's what those guys drive, respectively. I have no idea what Riley Leonard drives, and it's probably not important for the sake of a preview video. But Carson Beck is hurt, and he's out, and that's a big injury. I am of the opinion that Riley Mills being out for Notre Dame is just as big an injury. I had a little back and forth, a little spat, if you will, with one of my Notre Dame brethren, believe it or not, of which I have several. And I said that to him, and he said, "Bro, you're just hating on Notre Dame." And I said, first off, people got to stop thinking that every time someone offers a critique, it's hating on Notre Dame. I don't hate on Notre Dame. I actually get criticized for being a Notre Dame homer in the South, just so you guys know. But the Riley Mills injury, I told him, you can't be pumping up this dude all year and rightly telling me how great he is, only for you to discount the impact of the injury when he's gone. He said, "Oh, that's a fair point." No, he didn't. He still called me stupid. And that's why we haven't spoken since then. The quarterback dynamic here for Georgia is a layered dynamic. Okay, so if you just passively watch college football, like the casual college football fan looks and says, Georgia was a favorite in the preseason because of why? Because Carson Beck came back. Carson Beck was the preseason Heisman favorite. He was the favorite to be the top overall drafted quarterback, etc., etc. So, standard protocol. If you lose a guy like that and you're in the playoffs, you're at a big disadvantage. That's a fair way to think. It may be the way to think. I think it's a little more layered than that. Georgia had become quarterback-centric under Carson Beck. At no point should Georgia's program be quarterback-centric, because Georgia can acquire talent too well to make themselves quarterback-centric. And what I mean is, unlike in the NFL, where the quarterback is the entire franchise, in college football, talent acquisition is different. So in college football, programs like Georgia, and there are only a few of them, can stack a whole lot more talent, even in the portal era, than your run-of-the-mill mid-tier Power 4 team, which means if you make yourself quarterback-centric, you just disproportionately enhance the risk of one injury derailing your season. And there's no excuse for a Georgia to be in that kind of position. Wake Forest, yeah, if they get a star quarterback, Miami this year, Cam Ward, without him, big difference. Georgia shouldn't be that way. Now, have they or will they be that way? Well, we have a very small sample size. So Carson Beck goes down at halftime. Georgia's trailing to Texas. And in a very small sample size, Gunnar Stockton leads Georgia in a come-from-behind win against Texas. What can we make of that? In terms of extrapolating his stat categories and stat line, maybe not a whole lot. The intangibles, what I took away. I strongly encourage you to go back and watch that game. Don't look at the box score. That does you no good. Go back and watch the game. Watch the body language, watch the synergy, watch the energy. This is stuff you don't have to know a whole lot about X's and O's to pick up on, by the way. I don't care if you've never watched football. If you know human interaction and you know what you feel like when you're around someone who fires you up and who energizes you versus someone who doesn't bring that out in you, watch the Georgia team and how they respond to the second best quarterback on the roster versus how they played when the first best quarterback on the roster was on the field. It is not up to me to diagnose that. I'm just looking at it observationally and telling you what I see. You can't deny that, by the way, if you watch that. Now, that doesn't mean you win. Notre Dame could paste you by 25. But I do think it's important to note. So, the thing that we get here is the quarterback run. We certainly trade off arm talent. Gunnar Stockton, I don't think, can throw the ball like Carson Beck can. And he had an ugly interception against Texas. in that limited sample size. What we do get is the quarterback run. Now, the reason I mention that is because I think Georgia was at their best offensively this year when they had that element to their offense. Now, it was Carson Beck who did it, but the Tennessee game, I don't think it's any coincidence that it was their best passing game. Number one, because Tennessee's secondary leaves a lot to be desired. But number two, because Carson Beck ran the ball that day as well. Gunnar Stockton's got no problem doing that. Like, Gunnar Stockton will run into a freight train. I know, because he did. It was a Texas defensive back, hollering choo-choo in the alley. But play action working off that, I think, could be effective here. And I think a healthy Trevor Etienne could be effective here. So that's the Georgia offensive look. Like, in other words, I told you it was layered. I don't think it's nearly as detrimental as it looks. I thought Carson Beck would struggle against Notre Dame. Like, there was no world to me where Georgia was going out there and hanging 35 on Notre Dame. That was never going to happen. So this was a game that was always going to be compacted and played in the teens, 20s-ish. You know my backup quarterback theory, or if you don't, in college football, unlike the NFL, sometimes you lose your quarterback and an ultra-talented group of players like Georgia has in the aggregate can take it upon themselves to raise their level of play to the point where the cumulative effect of that is you end up playing a better version of your ball than you did with the starter in. And it makes no sense. It shouldn't make any sense. But it's understanding human psychology and the human nature around all of this. Now, with Notre Dame, you don't have to be psychological. You just need to know they can hit a home run on the ground at any point against anyone. I grew up in Georgia. I know my friends back home will listen to that, and you will scoff at it, and you will say, okay, so he did it against Indiana. Yeah, I saw that 98-yard run against Indiana. What did he do the rest of the day? Well, I got it on a piece of paper here. The rest of the day, Notre Dame, if you take away the 98-yard run, it's always fun. Take away my best play. Don't take away your best, just take away my best. What else did I do? 34 carries, 95 yards. Very pedestrian the rest of the day. But you know what? You can't take away the big run. It counted. It wasn't an experimental play they ran in the dark during a commercial break. It counted. And it also impacted the rest of the game. Okay, so Jeremiah Love rips off that 98-yard run. As it turns out, that was probably ball game, even though we didn't know it at the time. There will be a school of thought that you'll just have to prove wrong if you're Notre Dame. And that will be, yeah, but what you did against Indiana is not going to work against Georgia. You won't do that against Georgia. Why won't they do that against Georgia? This is what they can add in the hype video down in Athens. Jeremiah Love can run it explosively against anyone. That includes Georgia. Georgia's 59th in the country in explosive runs allowed. And break. I just know some programs out there are very fond of taking all the motivational meat that they can off of the bone that is our show. And I got no problem with it. I'm happy to help wherever I can, guys. Happy to help. He may rip some explosive runs against Georgia, too, is my point. And this is not a vintage Georgia defense. It has not been all year, except they made Texas look foolish. But there have been teams move the ball explosively on the ground and through the air against Georgia. I think Notre Dame can at least do one of those. Georgia, what do they struggle with? Okay, this is where I disagree with many people. In the past, we've seen Kirby Smart struggle against what? Against running quarterbacks, right? No, I disagree with that. I haven't seen Kirby Smart and his defense at Georgia or Alabama struggle against running quarterbacks. I've seen him struggle against true dual threat quarterbacks. This year, they struggled against Milroe. Milroe had 117 on the ground, but Milroe also threw the ball on him. They struggled against Haynes King, 110 on the ground, but Haynes King could also throw the ball on you, presented the threat to throw it. Jackson Dart had 6 yards per carry, but Jackson Dart could throw the ball on you. You had to respect that. There was balance in his game. This will all come down to Georgia and whether they respect Riley Leonard's ability to throw the ball. And there's really only one way to earn it. And it's not being 101st passing, which Notre Dame is right now. It's completing some balls down the field or even intermediate down the field early in the game. Otherwise, they'll just tee off on you. They'll clamp down. There is no one-dimensional quarterback that beats Kirby Smart. So you can't be one-dimensional. That's the long and short of that. You just can't be one-dimensional. The game script also is extremely important in this game. Game script, I think, is do I want to say this? Yeah. Game script is as important in the Georgia-Notre Dame game as it is any of these quarterfinal games, only because of how little we've watched Notre Dame trail this year. It's a huge testament to the team. It's not a weakness, it's a strength that they've played ahead the whole year. But what it does is it leaves this great unknown. Like, you can convince yourself, like I have, that the Northern Illinois game's a distant memory and it was week 2 and it has nothing to do with this game. Well, the only reason that I would bring that up is because that's kind of the last time I watched them trail and try and catch up, and they couldn't do it. So, yes, I agree. That's ancient history. Nothing about that game will impact this game, but there's a dynamic that was present in that game, and it's, what if Georgia gets up 14-3 and you're forced to throw the ball, which you will be? How do you play? That's an open-ended question. I have seen them so rarely in that spot, I quite literally don't know how they'd play in that game. I'd be uncomfortable if I'm a Notre Dame fan, if they're in that position. But I would not be that uncomfortable if I was Georgia. See, this is why game script and start is so important. Notre Dame can't play from behind. At least I view the game that way. Georgia, I don't care. Georgia has trailed like half a dozen times at the half in games they've won this year. Georgia's trailed constantly. They've been very bad at starting the game strong. Now, they've been great. I didn't check on this. I would imagine there aren't many better second half teams in the country than Georgia this year. So the trade-off to that is Notre Dame looks at that and says, well, but if we get up on you, you haven't come from behind on a defense like ours. That is probably true. That's why we're going to play the game. So, Colin, let's take a look at what the model thinks. Let's take a look at what FanDuel thinks. Georgia right now at FanDuel is favored by 1.5. The model has it at a pick. I am going to pick Georgia to win this game and cover. And I think Georgia is in a great position to shock a lot of people. I think Georgia's in position to really surprise a lot of people. Like, they're either going to wilt and Gunnar Stockton can't get it done, or they're going to have kind of the cattle prod to the side of the neck of college football, because this is where Georgia's program has to win. It is not a singular mission. It is not a star-laden team. It's not a quarterback-centric team anymore. It's Georgia football has to go win. And that's not what you're saying about these other teams. You look at Oregon, Dylan Gabriel, Evan Stewart. You look at Ohio State, you got several names on the defensive side of the ball. You got Will Howard, you got Jeremiah Smith. Likewise with Texas, that is not how you're talking about Georgia. And you either get scared by that or you adopt the mentality that I imagine Kirby Smart and the folks in that building have. And they just relish that. They love that. Like, that's the dynamic they crave. You go recruit all these star players, but you want them to blend into the overall system. Well, here's where you prove it. Here's where you really find out what that block G stands for. You really find out what that G means in the overall landscape, because you're in a position where people are going to doubt you. You're in a position, I would imagine, I don't know what the split will be. A ton of folks will pick Notre Dame to win this game. And I am on the other side. I'm going to pick Georgia to win this game. So I'm going to believe that there's still a little something to that culture dynamic. Because, see, Notre Dame's got a good one, too. So it's good on good, culture-wise. And a lot of these commonalities in the way that they go about their business are similar. That's why I love this game. It's the one we would have gone to if we weren't at the Rose Bowl. Give me Georgia very close to win this game.